I clearly remember hearing someone spelling out, and this is why I need to see his opening address again, but spelling out the four things that were going to be used to get these people. And I can remember the description about those points, and I can remember the thing that stood out to me was a crime against humanity. And I thought that covers a lot of territory, you know. And the feeling I had, I guess at the time, was I think they're kind of making up the law as we go. We didn't have any precedent for that. Mm-hmm. It was a case of how are we going to do this? What are the legitimate accusations that we can bring against these people? And then, of course, I just understood that Jackson wanted more documentary stuff and didn't want to mess so much with the witnesses, and of course, some later on, some of the books about it implied, of course, that it got a little dull with Jackson because when you brought in the films, you bring in a witness, you've kind of livened up the thing. But I'm sure that Jackson just legally must have been convinced that the best way to go was to have the documents that, you know, show that this is what you did.
You became a minister?
Yes.
And in your profession, as you reflect back on Nuremberg and, you know, that sort of crimes against humanity concept, is there an overlap with what it is that you've been preaching for 50 years?
It is interesting. Maybe there's a connection here. And this gets to be a long story. When I was in Kansas City as a minister there of a church, Joseph Atha, who was the president of Folger Coffee Company, made it possible for me to do a PhD at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Paid the bill, just totally. And I'd been out of seminary 10 years, so here was a case of being able to go back to school, which I had not even remotely entertained that thought. But he just came along and said, hey, if there's something you want to do, I'll support you for 2 years. And as I look back now, you've made me think of this connection. I had to do, of course, a dissertation for that PhD. And my concern, I guess, at that time was in the field of ethics. And so I did a dissertation on ethical realism in British and American Protestantism from 1920 to 1950. And in that, I had to cover the theologians who were writing at the time, and in many instances dealing with the issue of violence and war. So, you know, I ended up maybe dealing with that in a deeper fashion than I would have thought, you know, because, well, as you know, on the American scene, the great theologian who represented this mentality was Reinhold Niebuhr. And Niebuhr had started out as a pacifist and ended up feeling that there are times when you have to use power and force to overcome violence, and lost his innocence about pacifism. Mm-hmm. Well, that suited my mentality because I was not a pacifist. Mm-hmm. Because in self-defense, I was saying, hey, if we didn't go over there and stop Hitler, that thing would have just gone on and on and on. What's the end of that? So you have to use force sometimes to stop violence.
Isn't that interesting?